Hello, I'm Sheryl McCarthy of the City University of New York. Welcome to One to One. Each week, we address issues of timely and timeless concern with newsmakers and the journalists who report on them, with artists, scientists, educators, social scientists, government leaders, politicians. All will be one to one. Today, we'll explore the ways we communicate with each other. Who and what convinces us? Who leaves us cold? Who bores us? And why? We'll get some answers and tips as we talk with communication consultant Ruth Sherman. The author of Get Them to See It Your Way, Right Away, How to Persuade Anyone of Anything, published by McGraw-Hill, will help us to communicate more effectively and show us how the people we turn to for leadership do it. Welcome.
Thanks. Nice to be here.
As someone who has had a voice coach, is what it was called in the past, communications coaching seems to be a thriving business. Is that because most people communicate so poorly?
Not necessarily poorly, Sheryl. It has more to do with the idea that we just don't get any training in this stuff. It's ignored in school. We simply don't have the kinds of educational opportunities that we used to have. So kids coming up in schools, for example, are very focused on the 3 R's. Reading, writing, and arithmetic is what we used to call it. But they're not so focused on what it takes to stand up and give a presentation. And the teachers, unfortunately, aren't skilled in giving them feedback on that. Unless you have are in music or in theater and have an interest in that, you're really not going to get any training in this so-called art. So,
and you're suggesting that they used to get it, but they don't anymore?
It's absolutely. They don't get it as much anymore. As you well know, the educational system has gone in favor of standardized testing, and you can't test this kind of thing. This kind of thing doesn't show up. Communication doesn't show up on a standardized test. What does show up, of course, are the more quantifiable aspects of education. So in order to make sure the kids are doing well on the tests, something had to give. And one of the things that had to give were the arts and opportunities, of course, within the arts to learn to communicate.
So who are you trying to reach in this book, and what's the goal?
Everybody. I'm trying to reach everybody. The goal here is to dispel a couple of myths. The first myth is that charisma is inborn. You either have it or you don't, and if you don't have it, well, then, you're out of luck. The second myth is that self-promotion is the same as bragging. It's not. Self-promotion is the way of knowing whether you've got something to say, whom to say it to, when to say it, how to say it, and so forth. And of course, charisma, as you probably well know, is not inborn. It's a learned skill.
Well, how do you learn it? I mean, how does one go from being uncharismatic to being charismatic?
One does a couple of things, and they're very concrete skills. We beef up our nonverbal communication, meaning everything that we do that doesn't include the words that we say.
Body language, for one thing.
Body language, voice, eye contact, facial expression, all of the things that give our words additional meaning. They add meaning to our words. We also learn to listen better. We learn to listen better. There's a writer, Susan Roane, who has a funny thing to say about listening. She says, nobody recommends their doctor by saying, you ought to go see my doctor. He doesn't listen to me. Listening is really important. If you really want to grab somebody's attention, be a good listener.
And you will hear people say, well, about some political candidates, for instance, I felt, that he or she was listening to every word that I said and hearing what I said.
That's right.
That's a big positive.
That's right. That was often ascribed to Bill Clinton.
Right. You talk about the importance of the first impression. Mm-hmm. Tell me about that.
People make or form impressions about us within the first few seconds of meeting us, and that has everything to do with the way we carry ourselves, because they don't know us, they don't know anything about us necessarily, but the way we carry ourselves, the way we stride into a room, what we're wearing, how we give a handshake, whether we smile and make eye contact. During that moment, during those first literally 10 or 15 seconds, people form impressions of us. And that impression, you have a choice. You can leave a good impression or a bad impression. So the choice is there for you to decide to make a good impression.
And I assume it would, include things like whether one is friendly, one seems genuinely interested, or whether one is aloof. Those kinds of things would factor into it.
Absolutely.
I had a a former journalism professor who talked about, and we were talking about, you know, how students, how you could, he would talk to, you know, our students about, you know, applying for jobs. And he was saying, you know, in the end, it's all about love. They either fall in love with you, whatever your qualifications are, they either fall in love with you at that meeting or they don't. And, you know, you seem to be saying much of the same thing with the whole idea of the first impression.
And yeah.
How you can become more lovable, I guess.
Absolutely. And you mentioned something very good, very interesting in today's times. You're talking about interviewing. It's more important now than ever with the downturn in the economy and people being out of work or being fearful about being laid off. It's very important to be able to walk into that interview and make a bang up first impression.
So if you were talking to somebody, say I'm not going to say somebody just out of college, say somebody who's 35 and has recently been laid off from a job and is going for a job interview, what can you do, what pointers would you give them on how to make a good first impression?
The most important thing that I would tell them, in addition to what I just mentioned about carriage and comportment and body language and all the physical stuff, the nonverbal stuff, is to do their homework before they get there. Understand that this is an interview not only where the interviewer is asking them questions, but they're also sizing up the job that they're looking at. So do your homework. Know what the company's about. Understand a little bit about your interviewer if possible. Know what they wear. How do people dress at that job? So that you go in and you're looking as if you would fit within that company. So again, dress and adornment is another nonverbal code of communication. So the way we look and sound, it fits into that as well.
Mm-hmm. Now, women tend to be labeled as the great communicators, the sex that connects better with others because it cares more about connecting with others. But I suspect that that's not true in all walks of life. In business and politics, for example, who communicates better, men or women?
Well, we haven't seen a whole lot of women up there really communicating for politics. And we, unfortunately, I think the last statistic I saw for the Fortune 1000, I think it was 2006, there were only 20 women CEOs of the Fortune 1000. So we don't have a lot of good role models. So in terms of making a blanket statement, I really can't. What I do believe, however, is that there are definitely differences in the way the genders communicate. And that has much to do with the way we're socialized as we're growing up. And women are having to fight that or navigate that. It's a pretty rough sea, I think, for most women in professional life or political life.
So what are some of the differences in how women communicate that goes against them?
Women don't project the kind of confidence that men project. It doesn't come as naturally to them as it does for men. And I really shouldn't even use the word come naturally because, again, it's all about socialization. So, for example, boys, when they grow up playing sports. That's a big part of most boys' lives. Girls, the boys are dealing in large groups of boys, and the roughest, toughest boy is the boy who's going to get picked for the team, the boy with the most swagger. We don't know whether he's good at it or not, but he's going to be given a chance. Girls, on the other hand, tend to be more self-effacing. They tend to be a little bit less out front because they play in either dyads or triads, 2 or 3 girls together, playing house, playing dolls, trying to keep things, the power in that group, in that small group, even.
Right.
And so what happens for girls when they get into the workplace is that instead of being able to be direct, they end up wanting to level the playing field no matter where they go. And that's not how it works in the business hierarchy, which is a male-formed it's a male-formed institution.
Right.
So I think those are some of the problems that women face as they grow up. They have to change, but if they change too much, if they're too direct, they get hit for that. If they're not direct enough, they get hit for that. So it's a very tough row to hoe, I think. I
know there's one thing that women tend to do is ending sentences with a question.
Yes, yes.
What is that about?
We call that up talk. Up talk. Everything ends with a question, right? We all know it. That is, I call that a speech virus. It started with Valley Girl speech in California. I think it was probably in the 80s when that first came to the fore.
Right.
And it traveled east like the weather. So it is a speech virus. It's very contagious.
What is that about? Is that about trying to pull the other person into the conversation or give some of the power to the other person, or what is it about?
I don't think that it is, actually. I simply think it's a speech, it's a viral type of habit, much in the way we have other kinds of habits, like pronunciation of certain words, like the word nuclear. Which tends to be difficult for certain people.
Right.
There are reasons for that go beyond the habit. But the more we hear it, the more we think it's the right thing to say and the right way to pronounce it. So I think that that's what happened with this.
Do Valley girls still talk like that?
Oh, sure. Sure, as do Eastern New York girls. And New Jersey girls.
Okay.
Okay. Yeah.
Now you talk about the virtues of self-promotion.
Sure.
Which we think we tend to think. I think men are probably better than this, better at this than women. How do you promote yourself without being obnoxious?
It's a fine line, isn't it? Promoting yourself without being obnoxious is much about getting permission from the person to whom you're promoting yourself to do so. So, for example, let's say you're in business for yourself and you're making calls to clients. You're checking in with clients periodically to see if they have any business for you. You might say to that client, when is the next time I should call you? Instead of simply letting the phone call go without making that plan. And that client will most likely say, or a prospect will most likely say, oh, a couple of months, 2 months, 6 months even. Okay, fine, then you take responsibility, you write it down on your calendar, and you make that call in 2 or 3 or 6 months. When you pick up the phone to make that call in that amount of time, you say to that client, you asked me, we agreed that I would call back in 2 or 3 or 6 months, and therefore you've got that client's attention. That's one way to promote without being a so-called pest. So there's a fine line.
You also talk about that there's an art to leaving a good voicemail message or a good email message.
A lot of people are not quick when it comes to leaving that voice message. You've got your minute or two.
Right.
And you kind of don't want to fill the whole 2 minutes. You really want to fill 30 seconds. You want to make it as concise as possible. But what I advise for people who may not feel very comfortable with that, to write themselves a script. Just write something on the computer and right before they pick up the phone, hi, my name is so-and-so, I'm calling about X, here's my phone number, give me a call when you have a chance, or I will call you back in 2 weeks to check back in with you. Something very clear, very concise, so that you're not keeping the person on the phone for a long time.
That's a great idea.
Yeah.
That's a great idea.
I do it for myself.
Okay.
Yeah.
We're going to take a short break, and we'll be back with more with Ruth Sherman after the following message.
I see skies of blue and clouds of white, the bright blessed days, the dark sacred night, and I think to myself, what a wonderful world.
If you're not recycling, you're throwing it all away.
Welcome back to One to One. I'm Sheryl McCarthy of the City University of New York, and I'm talking with communication consultant Ruth Sherman. We are in the midst of a pretty interesting presidential race where communication is very important. How would you rate the 3 main contenders as on their communication skills?
Oh.
Why don't we start with John McCain?
Absolutely. John McCain has a lot of work to do. He is not natural as a communicator, never has been, probably never will be. But what I also, the impression I also get from John McCain is that he doesn't quite get how important it is for him to be able to get up there and give a good speech that rallies voters, that inspires people. I get that feeling from him. And that's going to be to his eternal regret if he doesn't do something about it. So that is certainly something I've noticed about McCain. I noticed in his speech that he delivered a few weeks ago, it was a big speech to the World Affairs Council, and he used, the speech was beautifully written. It was interesting, it was beautifully written, not meant for reading from a teleprompter. The sentences were very long, the words were Scrabble words. used a word exigencies, which just isn't the kind of word that we use in speaking.
Right.
So while his speechwriter, again, did a terrific job for people who are going to his website to read it,
right,
it was not an easy speech to deliver, and he didn't do a very good job at it. So it's a problem for him.
Okay. How about Hillary Clinton?
Hillary Clinton's got work to do, too, although I will say this about her. She's improved tremendously in just the last 2 months. As a speaker and as a communicator, she's improved tremendously. She, of course, has to deal with the issues of how she comes across and all of the baggage that she brings with her from her past her life.
Right.
And she's had a pretty difficult time overcoming that. A lot of the things that she does, unfortunately for her, I think, feed into people's existing impressions of her instead of contradicting those impressions.
When you say she's gotten better in the last couple of months, what's she doing differently that makes her better?
She realized that she was competing against a pretty masterful communicator, number one, and that if she didn't ramp it up, if she didn't ramp up her nonverbals, as we were talking about earlier, her voice, her expressiveness, her physical engagement, if she didn't look and sound like she meant what she was speaking about when she was up there, that she was simply not going to be able to make the kind of impression or leave the kind of impression that she so desperately wants and needs to leave.
Is it that authenticity issue or real person, or what is it?
Well, what she's struggling with now is the real person thing. And she's been struggling with that all along. There's no question about that. But now, of course, with this latest brouhaha, she's having a bit of a difficulty trying to come across as the less privileged and less elite than Barack Obama, which is a pretty interesting thing to be trying to do. So she's trying to do that, obviously, with her media outreach and the kinds of things that she's trying to put across to the public.
And as you said, we were talking before the show, that it's a movable feast. Everything, it moves every day. It moves every day.
It is, and it's delicious for somebody like me. Love it.
Now, Barack Obama.
Yes, Barack Obama is a masterful communicator, and he has brought an excitement to this election season that has been, we've been starved. The electorate, frankly, has been starved for years for a speaker of the ability and charisma of Barack Obama. There are few that can be compared to him who can deliver an inspirational, motivational speech the way he can. I can't remember anybody in recent memory who can do it. We thought of Bill Clinton and Ronald Reagan as great communicators. Neither one of them could deliver a speech the way Barack Obama can. And that is a credit to him, to his delivery skills, as well as to his writers who write just the right kinds of speeches for him.
Now, he clearly has charisma. Does John McCain have any? Does Hillary Clinton? You know, you'll hear people say that if you meet Hillary Clinton in person, you know, the minute she walks into the room, she lights it up, but that doesn't necessarily convey on a TV screen.
That's right.
At a distance.
That's right. He has that advantage over both of them. He has the advantage of, in those bigger speeches, the ability to reach large swaths of people, the millions that you have to reach in those types of arenas and
Whereas
speeches.
she does better in small groups, I gather.
She does much better in the small groups. That's right. And you're right. She does light up a room when she walks in.
How about McCain? Does he have charisma?
No.
Or does he needs to get some?
He needs to get some charisma.
How could he get some? What would you, if you had to give him a few pointers?
He's got to get some training, you know. He's got to get, I mean, his people should be working with him and try to persuade him to bring somebody in to help him. And these skills are concrete. These are not skills that you can't get. He's got to practice his speeches. He's got to give them a lot, maybe more practice than somebody like Barack Obama has to give them at this point. He can't sit and read them silently on the plane on the way to the gig. He's got to get up and practice them behind the podium and make sure that he's pausing at the right places and that his expression is correct for a particular word or phrase. So he's got to do that. You
talk in your book about the importance of showing emotion, of bringing emotion to your speech, to your delivery.
Yeah.
How has that played out in this campaign?
I think that the way that, for example, Barack Obama, let's use him to start off with, one of the things that he's been able to do in his big speeches is to use pauses and silences very effectively. When he does that, he gives his audience a chance to digest what he's saying and to also get emotionally connected with him. So he's allowing them, in a sense, to join with him on this wonderful emotional ride. He lets them ride the crest of the wave with him and enjoy the momentum that he creates with his words.
And you're not necessarily aware that he's bringing emotion to his speeches. I mean, you know, you had that incident with Hillary and the tearing up and that helping her. You're not necessarily aware that Obama is doing this.
That's right. He does it in a way that seems very natural. I am convinced he's very practiced at it, and he understands the value of it, which is something that Mccain does not quite understand, I don't believe, and that Hillary Clinton has come late to understanding.
Right.
So there's that piece of it. One of the things that Obama has to watch out for, though, and I've been convinced of this for the last month or so, is this issue of him not being as good in the interpersonal realm of communication. Yeah. He's got to watch out for that with the increased scrutiny. The fact when he's not feeling comfortable, it's obvious, and it adds up. It adds up, and it may hurt him.
How about the whole issue of, you know, showing your intellect or holding it back? Now, I happen to want a smart president, which brings me to the question of, why did Americans elect George Bush? I mean, people all over the world have noticed that this is not a very smart guy. I mean, he appears to be very vacuous. But how did he win this election?
He won the election because people liked him better than John Kerry. Presidential elections, much to people's chagrin, are not necessarily about the smartest person in the room. They're about who do you like the best? Who is the person who understands your life better than the others? Who is the person that you feel, as was often said with George Bush, you could sit down and have a beer with? And again, this is something I think that Barack Obama has to be cognizant of, has to remain cognizant of.
Because we know he moves us, but we're not sure if we want to sit down and have a beer with him.
We're not sure. We're not, it's not that we're not sure. I'd love to sit down with Barack Obama and have a beer. I mean, I can't imagine anybody wouldn't. But the idea that it would be a fun conversation or oh gosh, that I wouldn't feel talked down to, there's something there that has to be, he has to be careful about.
Would you want to sit down and have a beer with John McCain?
I personally would. I would,
okay,
of course.
I suspect I would too, actually.
Right. You know, we would. But in terms of right now, I have to be honest, who I'd most would like to sit down and have a beer with and throw a few shots down with is Hillary Clinton.
Okay.
I think she's making making some inroads there. You
have said that in the race between John Kerry and George W. Bush, you could tell just from their communication skills that Kerry was going to lose. Looking at the three candidates right now, can you tell who's going to win, who's going to lose?
Oh my gosh. You know, I've looked back at 40 years of presidential races, and in every single case, the better communicator has won, Sheryl. The better communicator has won. Doesn't have to be great. Witness Bush Sr. and Michael Dukakis. Neither one of them were great.
Right.
But the senior Bush, George H.W. Bush, was better. So if we go on that theory, then Barack Obama's got a pretty good chance of winning.
Yeah.
But I don't make any predictions.
Okay.
Not yet. Maybe next time when the race becomes down to two people.
Okay. We only have a couple of minutes to go,
Sure.
but tell me about some of your, I mean, you've been doing this for a while. Tell me about, you know, one of your successes or one of your failures.
Oh, my goodness. Oh, gosh. Plenty of failures. Oh, my goodness. Let's see. I think that working with my kids, trying to get them to be good communicators, I wouldn't necessarily call it a failure, but it's a real struggle, I think.
Why is that?
Well, kids are very focused on written communication.
They are?
Well, yes. All they do is IM, text, and email. They don't pick up the phone. They don't necessarily see their friends in person. And it's a real problem, I think, for kids now who are coming into the workplace, for employers, because what's happening with this generation is they don't know how to relate to people when they're sitting in a room in a meeting. So it's a real interesting thing. I'm struggling with that. Yes.
How about a success story?
Well, I'm happy to report that the presidential race, I get called pretty frequently in on it. I get a lot of calls from the mainstream press, certainly from you, and it's been fun for me to go and talk about this. Better than working for a candidate.
Yeah, and where they fall short and how they could improve themselves, all of that.
Well, what my purpose is in talking about this is to help citizens, is to help people become better informed. I think if we can look at the way they communicate and we can be critical about what makes them persuade us, then we are better informed and we won't necessarily get sucked in by some of the more surface issues that they use, which are very proven and very effective.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Very
so
interesting.
that's my goal.
Okay. We're out of time, and I want to thank Ruth Sherman for joining us. Get Them to See It Your Way Right Away, How to Persuade Anyone of Anything, has been published by McGraw-Hill. For the City University of New York and 1-to-1, I'm Sheryl McCarthy.